I met Sundance at a fundraising gala last year. His voice drew me in and his soul spoke to me. He's a transformational coach, sound creation artist, and Indigenous relations representative. He is deeply committed to unity and collective awareness. His message is forward thinking and encompasses healing and transformation at both an individual and global level. Sundance, I am so honored to have you here with me today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I really appreciate it. It's great to be here.
Before we start, it's very important to me that I would like to acknowledge that we are recording on Treaty 4 territory. Sundance, you are of First Nation heritage and descent. You're a band member of the Peguis First Nation and were raised in the city of Regina. Can you tell us what it was like growing up as an Indigenous person at that time?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. I really appreciate it. So I was born in 1980, and when I was a little kid between the ages of, I guess, 0 and 5, as much as I can remember, inside the home, to the best of my knowledge and to the best of my ability to see into that, as a child, things were fairly intact. And I didn't really see that I needed to alter or hide who I was until we left the home. And so that changed when I went to kindergarten. And that was when I really saw that. Because at home, I was called Sundance. And I went and got a tour of the kindergarten classroom a couple of days before our first day of school. And I remember going in, seeing my kindergarten box, and seeing this long name written on the kindergarten box. It was written with one of those little labeler tags. And when I came back to school, I went back to that kindergarten box, and there was a different name on it. And that was the first time as a child that I had an identity crisis. Because where all of the other kids knew the direction that they were headed, I seemed in that moment directionless and confused as to why my name wasn't Sundance anymore. And as a kid, you're innocent to that. You don't think about, well, what are all my names? You think about what name it is that you're being called at home. And so there's a real innocence in that. And that was really, where I started to see, not from really a place of knowing, but where I was now seeing through the lens of misunderstanding about who I really was, and thinking that who I really wasn't good enough and it needed to be changed. And so from that place in my life, many different ways of being came from that to try to compensate for who I wasn't, who I thought I wasn't. And that has become a life's work and a life's journey to reclaim that authenticity. And when we experience trauma, we do something that we're not aware of, is we exchange or trade off our authenticity in order to attach. And so in that moment, I wouldn't have even known what I was doing, and I just would have done it. And so the question becomes, who did you tell? Well, I didn't tell anyone. Oh, there's your trauma. And so that that was sort of the foundations of life for me, and what I understood as growing up in just that little first part of life.
Do you think that that really was the beginning that you noticed that is labeling a fair way to say what was happening here? Or how would you describe that feeling?
I think the real, as a kid, I think when you get out of the situation, you're just happy to be out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And to just be getting on with life. There, but I think that yeah, like that would be a label, you know, um, because I didn't know what it meant to be Indigenous. I just knew from now on I was going to do whatever I could to hide the fact that I was.
Mm. That's a powerful statement right there.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk a little bit about your dad.
Mm-hmm.
Now, your dad was a survivor and an attendee of the Brandon Residential School. Can you help the listeners and myself fully understand what the 60s Scoop was all about?
Yeah. So the 60s Scoop refers to a time between, so it started, the tracings of it started in about 1951, where this thing came in, where there, previous to that, kids were being rounded up and sent to, or also stolen, and put into these government-run, church-run Indian residential schools. Now, what the government needed and what the church needed was to do this faster. And so what then they did was they put forward a couple of different legislations that took the power that the Indian agent had. So if you're an Indigenous Canadian, or if you have a treaty card, status Indian card, you're assigned an Indian agent. And so depending on your territory or wherever you're located, you would be assigned an Indian agent. And so usually the Indian agent would be then the determining factor as to who would go and how it would be done and all that. But because there was an influx of Indigenous kids being born in that period of time, and I imagine the government had this, this was forced assimilation. There was an agenda to get rid of the Indian, to take the Indian out of the child. And so that there wouldn't be an Indian left. That's the whole thing with a status Indian card and why it's numbered. It's to be that one day that number will be 0. And through the process of forced assimilation, that would happen. So how do we move this faster? I guess must have been the question. And that was, well, we'll take the power that the Indian agent has, and we'll also grant now authority to the social workers and other governing bodies within territories and districts. So they now just have say to which kid can go, which kid gets taken from the family, which kids go up for adoption, which kids get moved out of province, which kids get moved out of the country. So this wasn't just a thing in Canada. This was also a thing globally. I heard that there was a kid, there were kids even sent to New Zealand. So it was really about displacing a people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the terminology and language of genocide comes from, because it's a cultural genocide. If we have something that means something to us, and that there's an emphasis on what this is that creates the very fabric of who we are as human beings, and we remove that, then there won't be anything for them to fight for. So that was what happened with the 60s Scoop. And so that ran from then very like installed and like in place and up and running from 1961 to about 1980. And then the last remnants of it sort of trickled off in 1984, and the last residential school closed in 1997. And so, but you could be gone out getting groceries, and you could return home and your kids were gone. The 60s Scoop came from a person that said, it feels like we're just scooping up children. That's where the terminology came from. And so that was what it was designed to do. Was it gave social workers and the system the ability to deem who was fit as a parent and who was unfit as a parent through their own judgment, through their own bias. And then that would be the determining factors to who would go and who wouldn't. And my dad was a part of that process. And there was nothing that you could do about that. And if the parents resisted, they would face jail time. That was punishable with jail.
So there was no choice. Sundance, did your father share any of his experiences from growing up in the residential school with you and your siblings?
Yes, he did. And I remember hearing him tell me these stories of residential school. And I remember not really being able to understand it. I knew what school was like for me, but it just didn't sound like anything close to what he experienced in residential school. And he was a runner. I heard that he ran away more than any other kid that attended Brandon Residential School. And part of running away is being punished. And so that would have mean that he went through an immense amount of punishment. In that he eventually ran away from residential school and ended up on the streets in Vancouver. He ran away from Manitoba and went to essentially, I guess, the furthest place you could go, aside from the North Pole. He went to Vancouver and ended up out there, and began to live out his life. But the damage had been done, and it was such a collective thing that all of those kids faced together, you know, and the whole process, the whole sort of inverted ritual that these kids were put through upon, you know, being, first of all, scooped up from their homes, then taken, that would have been about 90 minutes away to Brandon, and then being showered off in front of administrators and staff, and then being deloused. You know, I wouldn't have even known what delousing was unless I saw the Shawshank Redemption, you know, but there's this white powder that they put on you, and apparently it burns, and then they shaved your head, you know, and any sort of language that was intact from the home was forbidden and also punishable. And this is one of the other real powerful things about what I get to do in my life as a transformational coach. So much of our language as Indigenous people cannot be spoken without you knowing who exactly you are and exactly what you're made up of. Inseparable from spirit, divine. And there's just nowhere throughout that whole process that is in existence. And yet, was supposed to have happened under the covenant of God. And so it was just it was a different God. So it's not one that I acknowledge. That was really, a process that I needed to learn in my life. I did need to learn this because I needed to understand how I was going to go from like survival to thriving. And within the work that I do is the power of using our language to create. Because as Indigenous people, our language was also something that was taken from us. And now we have the opportunity to relearn language and get a better understanding of who we are. And no doubt that the power of our language works cross-culturally through any language.
Can you explain to us how your dad's trauma became your trauma and this whole concept of intergenerational trauma?
Mm. So I'm going to just start at the beginning with how my dad's trauma affected our trauma. So I said that my dad was a runner when he was in residential school. Aside from hearing that, my dad never really showed me any sort of thing around running. Okay. And yet, within who I've been in my life, up to the point that I became and entered into recovery, I ran from everything. But I didn't really see that from my father, or something that I would distinguish as running. And yet it was something that really sort of encapsulated me, was to just run from things. Mm-hmm. And so when we talk about intergenerational trauma, it doesn't start with me. It starts with our ancestors. And the thing about time is that it's not localized, and we use time to agree to meet at places on this day and on this time so we can be functional. Outside of that, there isn't time. And so when we talk about doing ancestral healing, or when we talk about healing the wounds of the past, we're just dealing with the present energy that's always been there, that's been offset into now this present. And so when I've sat with this and wanted to find a way to reconcile it just for my own well-being, I've seen that it's like not this great distance that I need to travel to go back into healing intergenerational trauma. It's what I can work on right now in the present moment that's coming up from the past. The past has no power to make me think about it. All of the power that I'm ever going to need is right here, right now. I won't find any type of charge or any type of pulse from the past unless I create it now. And so my dad didn't know that. And so for him, what he was reliving and re-experiencing over and over and over again was the reaction to those traumatic events that happened within residential school. And so for us, it was about him closing off my mom from us, taking us and moving us to Manitoba. We didn't know what was going on at the time, but to the outside world, we were kidnapped. We were missing. My mom didn't know where we were. She was told that she's not getting us and she needs to figure it out. And so that was a direct impact that really my mom experienced. And then furthermore, for me, our house sort of became a place for people to squat. It was a place that was once a home. Um, and I went from having a bedroom and a nice bunk bed in there to sleeping on the floor of my father's bedroom for days at a time while there were loud, obscene parties going on. And I wasn't able to leave the room because there were parties going. I needed to stay in the room all the time. And that was really when I had my first drink. Actually, I was about 7.5, 8. When people would pass out, I would leave the bedroom because everyone was drunk and passed out, and I'd go and drink the bottoms of their beers and light cigarette butts. Um, and it's so interesting. No one taught me how to do that. I just observed that as a kid. And but guess what was in there? Deeply embedded in that was a coping mechanism, you know?
Yeah.
And,
And I
and so that, go ahead, sorry.
so I'm sorry to interrupt you. I was going to say an observed coping mechanism, right? We see other people coping this way, so maybe it's the best way to cope.
Absolutely. And that then became that became like learned and a behavior that I would then act out for many years of my life after that. I knew that I could find a reprieve in a drug or some type of drink. I could get that. And when they're,
How did that affect your life?
yeah. Well, for a long time I was bitter after I got clean because I couldn't believe how much time I wasted on drugs and high and not actually like living from a sense of purpose. I got over it pretty quick though, but I was resentful about that. Um, but it affected my relationships with people. It it affected my commitments to things. I certainly couldn't commit to anything. I was totally unreliable. I had no sense of self-worth. Um, and I was just, I almost had like life on autopilot in between drug uses because drug use was where I was able to pacify. Um, that was where I was able to get my reprieve. And what I would then come to understand is being like, drugs was really my first romantic relationship. That's what my first romantic relationship was drugs. I would do anything for it. I would go to
How did
any
you
lengths. I'd go to any lengths for it.
how did you end that relationship? When did you realize that this was maybe not a great way to leave your life?
Um, I woke up on the kitchen floor and in the middle of the kitchen floor, passed out, empty house. And I remember looking at right across there's a bottle of liquor and a bunch of cigarette butts in it. And I just said, my life has turned into an ashtray. And um, I got a phone call after that and said, yeah, you got to move out. And I was then invited to a 12-step meeting. I went to a recovery meeting, and that became the first initial steps my in this walk of life. And um, I went to that meeting and I heard people share from their experience and strength and hope. And I realized, well, they're not sitting around talking about how to stop drinking. They're sitting around just sharing stories about their life. And I'm finding like I'm able to relate. And that's really powerful. Like, this is what's going to help me stay sober. I just knew that after I left the meeting, I didn't have an urge or craving to drink, or at least the hour that I was there, I wouldn't have an urge or craving to drink. And that for me was really what it was about, because I remember waking up in mornings where I was sober and thinking, okay, I'm not going to drink today. But, by noon I was loaded. Right. And I just, I, I, I couldn't withstand the itch and of what it felt like to use. I knew that I was able to pick up a substance, put it in me, and get a result. And that worked. What I didn't understand was that the way you heal, or that the way you find that peace in your life, is through community. Community is what helps you offload that intense charge of addictions, traumas, behaviors, misunderstandings. When we share that into a room full of people, that then takes the energy and displaces it amongst everybody. So now you're not carrying it anymore, and you're also witnessed in that. And so it's just that's how simple it is. That literally is, that's how simple it is. It doesn't get any more confusing than that. I can't do confusing. I need it to be simple. And that's how simple it is. I'm struggling. I go somewhere. I share. By the end of it, I'm not struggling. I come home and I get on with my life.
You know, our stories are very different, yours and mine. We lost our daughter in a car accident. So my trauma is different from yours, but I would absolutely agree 1,000% that connection and community is an integral part of surviving whatever hardship you're facing. And without it, I don't know that healing is possible. That's how simple I see it. I don't know if you would agree with me. I mean, there's a whole lot of other things that need to come into the mix. It's not just that, but I would say that's a big, big part of healing.
Huge. It's monumental. Because even in that, then we get to do things like this, serve. Mm-hmm. We get to serve from our wealth. You know, this is a mental health podcast, and we get mental wealth from it.
Percent. Mm-hmm. So I want to dive a little bit. There's so much to unpack here. And unfortunately, I don't want to take up too much of your time, but everything you do is a stand for truth and reconciliation. I have so much respect for that. How does the work you do help you in your own healing journey?
This is pretty cool. And I didn't realize this when I started, and I get to put my pen to paper. And when I put my pen to paper and the creative juices are flowing, I am in my authenticity. And that's how, for me, and from what I've seen from a lot of people, is how you heal trauma, is by being in your authenticity. I don't need to go at that thing. I don't need to go at that wound. I'll work on, there's nothing that I can ever do to eliminate the images that are in my mind from some of the most incredible things that were debased in my life. That, I think, will probably always, those images will always be there, I think, until I die. But it's that those images don't carry the pulse or the charge that they used to carry anymore. And so when I'm writing things down and I'm creating and I'm in my authenticity, I get to relive these experiences in my life. But now I'm the creator. I'm not the created. And now I have a certain sense of authority and voice on where life goes from here. And I get to do that with my higher power, or what I understand God to be. I get to do it with that. And I get to also do it with my partner. I get to do that within my community. And I get to use this story from a place of when it was once something that would diminish my power. I get to now use this as a story that is just rooted in just pure absolute power, the power of creativity. And I also get to, this for me is a huge thing. It's it's like everything, is I get to see where the nature of my experience is coming from. Because before treatment or before 12-step groups, and when I was in active addiction, I had no idea where my experience was coming from. I just thought my experience was coming from you and anybody else that was in my way. That's where my experience was coming from. Just get out of my way or let me leave, please. So that was where my experience was coming from. And when we look and see that there's this thing that's being projected on to the wall, and we're seeing that wow, like, okay, so actually that's not the experience. It's actually coming through that hole in the wall over there where those little lights are coming out of. That's where my experience is coming from. So I'm not always looking at like the form of what's been created or the form of what I think my experience is. I understand that that's actually not where my experience is coming from. My experience is coming from something that's actually formless, but what I'm doing in the moment is I'm projecting thought onto that thing and I'm re-experiencing it through my consciousness. And that's making me feel a certain way. And when I get caught up, I get caught up. I get caught up. Who doesn't get caught up?
Right.
The beautiful thing about that is it doesn't take long for me to turn that around and be like, wait, I'm in a bit of a misunderstanding here because I'm retracting and I'm pulling away and I'm starting to withdraw. That's really clear. It's not a hard thing to miss.
So when you're in your teens, you discovered this amazing gift you have, your voice. So tell us how music and sound has woven its way into the work you do and how it's helped you.
So cool that happened in a really funny kind of way. I stayed for lunches when I attended Tom Collegiate, and they had a choir program there, and they had a brilliant choir teacher. He just played some notes on the piano, and he said, "Okay, just follow me," right? And he goes, "Okay, good." And then he goes, "I'll do this," and he goes, and I did that, and he goes, "Okay, great." So he heard that I had like this voice that I was able to like follow along and really stick to it. It was natural. That was what he was so good at seeing that with people and their voices. Was like, he didn't need to work with people that, he wasn't trying to make people that weren't that good at singing amazing. He saw that people that were good singers to be great. And he just worked with it that way. And that was what he did with me. And it was just such a short period of time. But as we find out, when we find out the fundamentals of things, we're able to access those fundamentals relatively quickly. And that was what really began my journey in singing. And I never forgot how to do that. It's just, I stopped doing it because I was lost in active addiction. And then when between uses, I would play my guitar, I would sing. And it was, I think, utilizing my music ability to be a powerful creator that I am today seems so out of, it just seemed like, a pipe dream, really. This seemed like no possibility. I couldn't stay clean. I needed drugs. I just couldn't stay clean long enough to do any of that. When I got clean, that became a possibility. And as we see now, it's something that I've cultivated over the years. And I brought a level of mastery to my voice and song to help utilize and provoke emotion during my events to help create a container of what that experience was like when I was a kid in some of these most traumatic situations in my life, to also what I sensed and what I experienced within spiritual awakening. I can really use the brush of voice to paint in any way that I want. And it also helps communicate what it is, the message that I'm trying to get across to people. Because if there's anything in trying to deliver a message, it's the distance between me and you and our ability to be able to communicate that. But there's this invisible fabric of understanding that, first of all, knowing you and I are connected. And second of all, let's make it easy to get that message from me to you. And how can I do that? Well, I can do that by being vulnerable and open and singing does that. It creates a bridge that people will walk across and come and meet you at. And that's just a tremendous gift, you know. And to think that I just for many years I threw it away.
But you rediscovered it, and that's the
Yeah,
beautiful part of your story.
yeah. It's an amazing grace, is what that is. You know, I've built my life on it, and actually, I'll be in Birmingham at the end of May. I've been invited to an event that is it's called the Ultimate Experience. And I'll be at this event, and I'm going to be singing in a theater in England. Um, you know, I'm going there for 6 minutes, 6 minutes of glory. And but you know what? That's what the power of voice will do. I'm not an exception to the rule. Everybody has this within them. If they want to access who they are, if they want to access the state of being, anybody can do this. Anybody can do this.
Do you think that everything in our lives has led us to the moment that we're at?
I do.
And in not in just a traditional time frame, as you say, but that going through these adversities, you know, intergenerational trauma in your case, addiction in your case, losing a child in my case, that these things have given us the option, because not everybody chooses that path, but the option to learn, to grow, and to serve others.
Yeah.
Do you
Abs-
think that you would be the man that you are today had you not experienced all of those hardships in your life and challenges?
I wouldn't be, no. And you know, me and my beautiful partner Karen, we talk about this so much. Um, we come from like two drastically different lives, drastically different. I don't think it can become more polarized than what it is. And we know that our experience in life was just like, we can now honor that. We can honor that this is the way life was, and this is the way life is today. And every single thing has had an effect. Everything has had an effect. And when we see that everything has had an effect, we can get to become the cause for things occurring in our lives. And that is what is so valuable. When you can be in a place that you can share that for people, and you can offer that to people, that what you're seeing in your life is symptomatic. What you're seeing in your life right now is an effect, and that your problem right now in life isn't actually what you think it is. It might be the problem in your life, but it's not the cause. The cause is something different. And um, when we understand that, when we see that, it opens up a whole array of potentiality. So for sure, I do.
How has mindset and perspective played a role in your journey?
Mm. Um, well, I think it's everything.
Mhm.
Next to, because I don't separate my spirituality. I don't separate my physical life. I don't separate what we do at Sacred Compass and Spirit Wealth from what I perceive in my life to be. I realized that we live in a thought created reality, and that we're living the feeling of our thinking moment to moment. Um, and that I have an opportunity now to come from a place that is inside out, not outside in, where it once was. That um, I don't experience my circumstances. I experience the thinking about those circumstances. You know, the other real piece of this with trauma and the body is that trauma is not what happens to you. It's what happens inside of you, you know? And I'm sure you're well aware of that with with what you've experienced with your daughter, and that is like, at some point in life, we have the opportunity to get some clarity or to slow down. And then something comes up from this invisible, formless thing, that we get an insight into something, a sight from within, and we see, I can actually serve. I can take this thing that I felt like the universe was robbing from me. Now I can have an opportunity to use this. I can make this actually mean something that matters to me. And that's what transformation is. The insight isn't good enough. An insight doesn't mean transformation. What means transformation is action. That's what means transformation. And when we're in action, an old saying I heard is, God moves with the movers. And I've seen that as something to be true in my life. And when we activate and are with something that we set out as a goal, and create a mindset around that, it can be very powerful, because then it becomes a state of being, and because our being does our doing. And to me, we're talking about this at the end, but honestly, if being is everything, you're never not being, you're always being. And for me, it's just an opinion, it's the most powerful force in the universe. The state of being that you choose to activate at any given moment to get the result that you're getting. That's a personal, internal decision that you're making. And when we understand that we have a power to access our own state of being and have a bit of say in what the outcome is going to be, that's incredibly powerful. And again, it's also incredibly simple. I never actually thought that it could be that simple. And I almost needed to do work around the simplicity of it. In fact, I did need to do work around the simplicity of it. How could it be that if I accessed a different state of being by saying, who do I need to be someone that is more loving and kind? Well, I need to be someone that is more loving and kind. Is it really that simple? Yes, it is that simple. Well, what can I do to ensure that that happens? Let's say it's a goal. Well, then we design or create, as a creator, in our authenticity, a system that helps us do that. And I just want to acknowledge your system. From the moment that we made an agreement to do this podcast, I've been able to experience your system, and I love it. You have an amazing system. I love your whole intake system. I love the email prior to the communication, and just coming on this has been just such an awesome experience. But the system that you initialized to make this happen at this time works perfectly for the system, for the result that you're getting. And it's also an insurance plan to know it's going to happen.
Mhm.
So it's all so simple.
I think two really important words that you said there are choice and decision.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not always easy. Sometimes the choices that we make are hard. They're
Yes.
hard. And the actions are hard. But it all comes down to choosing, believing, and doing. I love that. And I too believe that it doesn't have to be complicated. I think the complicated part is to realize, as you said, it can be simple, and all you got to do is start.
Yeah.
Start. So I know that our listeners are going to want to look you up, check out your website, and learn about the work that you do, because you do so many different things. So if you want to give us just a summary on some of the work that you do and where people can find you, that would be great.
Mm-hmm. So first of all, the main landing page is sacredcompassjourney.ca. You can search me under there as Sundance Robson. I have a whole profile up. White Feather is also located on sacredcompassjourney.ca, which is a live keynote event that I do. I do it for small business, large corporate, and large government. And I'm also a one-to-one coach. I don't know how I could have almost forgotten that. I'm a one-to-one coach, and I'm also a group facilitator. And um, I love it so much. It's the most amazing job on earth to be able to have this, to be able to create things with people over a period of time, and also be able to really help people relax. You know, I I don't think I've ever met a person that couldn't use just a little bit more space inside of their body and inside of their head, you know. And um, so I do one-to-one coaching in that aspect, and I also do one-to-one consulting and business coaching too.
Awesome. And I will put the links for that in the show notes as well, so it's easy for people to find. Sundance, it is an honor to say that I know you, I've met you, I've attended your White Feather events. Amazing. If anybody has the chance, please go. You are creating positive change in this world. And I truly believe that everything in your life is just leading to greater and greater things for you. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Such an honor, and thank you so much for this podcast. And really, it's such a powerful testament to your life and your family's life and your daughter's legacy and all that.
You know, I had a discussion with my son not that long ago, and it went something like this: when we know better, we can do better. And I think that that's a great way to end this podcast today. So take care, everyone, and we'll see you next time.
Miigwech.